the Medici.
Anna Maria Ludovica.
Please like this video so that more people have access to this content. Enjoy and also follow this channel to see other videos about art.
Anna Maria Ludovica, the last of the Medici. Born 1667, died 1743. The Electress Anna Maria Ludovica was 70 years old when her brother, Gian Gastone, died. Married at 24 to the Elector Palatine of the Rhine, she had filled an important position for 26 years, up to the time of his death and her return as a widow to live with her father, Cosimo. And during those years she had shown herself to be a woman of unusual ability. After her father's death she had, during the 14 years of her brother's reign, lived more or less in retirement, not being on good terms with him, and feeling shame at the degradation into which he sank during the latter part of his reign. Endowed with more energy and force of character than either of her brothers, she had ruled well during the few years that her father had left the government in her hands, notwithstanding that she was considerably handicapped by the style of administration which he had established. As the result of her satisfactory control of affairs, she had seen herself earnestly desired by the people of Tuscany as their future ruler, and had seen a decree passed by the Florentine Senate assuring the throne to her on her brother's death. And she had also seen that decree spurned and overridden by the chief powers of Europe, herself and her ancient family insulted, and the independence of her country trampled upon. She was now to see the final stage in that process, and the inauguration of a foreign rule over Tuscany. Even the promise that in any new government established she should be a member of the council and have the rank and title of Grand Duchess being set aside. It would all have been hard enough for an exceptionally proud woman like the Electress Anna to endure, if the Austrian Grand Duke had proceeded to occupy in person the throne which her grandfather's great-grandfather had created. It was made many times worse by the kind of rule which was set up. Upon Gian Gastone's death, the new Grand Duke, Francis II, came to Florence, and formally took possession of the state, but after a month or two departed to Vienna, and thenceforth left the government of Tuscany to be permanently administered, or maladministered, by an agent, a certain Monsieur de Beauvais, who was given the title of Prince de Craon. Both he and his wife were persons of exceedingly low birth and manners, yet they assumed vice-regal airs, lived in the royal palace, and maintained a third-rate kind of court, the chief feature of which was its vulgarity. All posts in the new administration were speedily filled with Lorrainers, and the Tuscans had ocular demonstration at every turn that they were now under a foreign rule. The meanness, the corruption, and the degraded character of this collection of needy place hunters are graphically described in the letters of the first English ambassador ever sent to the court of Tuscany, which show that, as far as corruption in the administration was concerned, the country had gained nothing by the change. With a court of this description established in the palace, there ensued a total decline in the dignity which, even in the worst days of Cosimo III and Gian Gastone, had ever been accustomed to reign there. Horace Mann remarks on the entire inability of the new regime to maintain a due ceremony even on grand occasions, and says, "They seem to forget the example of the Medici, the ceremony of whose court put it in their power to make a figure of things of more importance." Added to this, the ignorance and want of taste of the newcomers in all matters relating to art was colossal, and this, while specially irritating to the Florentines, often had the most ridiculous results. Among other demonstrations of this want of a quality which every Medici had possessed, the arrangement of the pictures in the palace offered a conspicuous example. These were rearranged on a new principle, the two guiding rules of which were, first, the degree of freshness of the gilding on the frames, and second, the position of the figures in the picture, which figures must not turn their backs towards the throne. It was no wonder, the new government being of this description, that the Electress Anna, the descendant of a race which, even in their decay, had still been distinguished, kept herself aloof from such a company. She occupied her own separate portion of the palace, and had no relations with the new Grand Duke's agent and his wife. She lived retired, but it was a retirement of the utmost splendor. All that art and ingenuity could supply, and money purchase, the aged daughter of Cosimo gathered round her. Jewels, precious metals, costly attire, the mass of these was immense. Moreover, she still continued to add pictures to the Uffizi gallery. As a child she had known her great uncle, Cardinal Leopold, and had imbibed some of the ideals which animated him, and nearly all of the pictures of the Flemish and German schools which the Uffizi gallery possesses were added to it by her. The amount that this daughter of the Medici spent in charity astounded the English ambassador: 1,000 zecchins a month, often more. As 3 zecchins made £1 sterling, this represented £4,000 a year, equal at the present value of money to considerably more, and even this, he says, she often exceeded. No wonder the poor wept inconsolably when she died. She continued to maintain, to some extent, the state to which she had been accustomed in former days. The poet Gray, who was presented to her in 1740, describes her as receiving him with much ceremony, standing under a huge black canopy, and as never going out but to church, and then with guards, and 8 horses to her coach. Thus did Anna Maria Ludovica de Medici maintain in all ways the name of her family. However much that name had suffered discredit through others, it suffered none through her. And whether in regard to ruling with ability, the encouragement of all forms of art, a generous liberality to the poor, or the maintenance of a proper dignity, she showed herself a worthy descendant of the best of those who had gone before. The object, however, which chiefly engaged both her time and her money was the completion of the family mausoleum. The work had somewhat languished during the reigns of Cosimo III and Gian Gastone, but Anna Maria Ludovica applied all her energies, and the greater part of her large income, to completing it as far as possible during the few years of life that remained to her. Her health was failing, she knew that she had but a short time, and she pressed on this work vigorously, giving it as much as 1,000 crowns a week, and in her will leaving a large sum to be invested in order to provide a regular income for the completion of the building according to the original design. There is something both pathetic and fine in the sight of this lonely and childless woman, the last of her race, steadily laboring in the midst of disappointment, sorrow, and ill health to complete the mausoleum of her ancestors before death should call her away to follow them. But Anna Maria Ludovica did something more noteworthy than this. Her chief act was one as fine under the circumstances as anything the Medici did throughout their history. And by it she caused their sun, so long enveloped in dark clouds and impenetrable gloom, to shine out, as it sank, in one departing ray of most resplendent glory. She hated the new dynasty. She felt that her family had been grievously treated by not being allowed to leave the throne of Tuscany to whomsoever they considered had the best right to it. She felt herself still more grievously ill-used in not being allowed to succeed her brother as Grand Duchess in her own right, while the sore feelings thus created were daily kept alive by the conduct of the ignoble court occupying the palace which had been built by her family and had been their home for 200 years. But at the same time she loved Tuscany. She was keenly mindful of her family's long and honorable connection with that country, and she was determined that whatever her father and brother had been, she, at least, would support that connection with honor to the very end. And so she made that splendid gift which should make her name ever honored in Florence. Far-reaching memories and mingled feelings must have filled the mind of Anna Maria Ludovica as, Last solitary owner of the greatest collection of art treasures in the world, she wandered through the long galleries of the Uffizi and the Pitti, surrounded by this mass of pictures, statues, bronzes, rare gems, and other works of art, the earliest of them executed for Cosimo, Piero, and Lorenzo, the latest added to the collection by herself, and thought over what she had determined on doing with this great inheritance. The convention between the powers which had assigned the throne to a foreign prince had not touched the vast private property of the family, including the countless objects of art and other valuable things with which their palaces, villas, and picture galleries were crowded, and to all these she had succeeded on her brother's death. The whole of this invaluable collection of treasures Anna Maria Ludovica now gave to the state of Tuscany forever, in the person of the new Grand Duke and his successors, on condition that none of it should ever be removed from Florence, and that it should be for the benefit of the public of all nations. What the value in money of this truly royal gift may be is probably beyond computation. It included, with much besides, a. The whole of the pictures and statues which were in the Uffizi Gallery, the Royal Palace, the Villa Medici at Rome, and the other villas of the family, and now forming the Uffizi and Pitti galleries. B. The rare collection of gems and other objects of art, now in the gem room of the Uffizi Gallery. C. A great collection of cameos, engraved gems, and similar articles, now in the Museum of the Bargello, and including the celebrated collection of coins and medallions of Lorenzo the Magnificent, the oldest in Europe. D. Statues and busts by Donatello, Verrocchio, Mino da Fiesole, and other notable sculptors, now in the Museum of the Bargello. E. A great collection of bronzes, now in the Museum of the Bargello. F. The new sacristy, with the masterpieces of Michelangelo. G. The whole of the contents of the library of the palace, and the Medici library in San Lorenzo. H. A large and important collection of Egyptian and Etruscan antiquities, now forming the chief part of the Egyptian and Etruscan museums, the Etruscan portion being specially valuable. I. A valuable collection of majolica, Urbino ware, Faenza ware, rare suits of armor, and curious and valuable arms, now in the Museum of the Bargello. J. A large collection of valuable tapestries, now forming the Galleria degli Arazzi. K. The valuable tables of Pietradura work, cabinets, and other precious furniture, now in the Uffizi and Pitti galleries. L. The inlaid tables, valuable cabinets, tapestry, and other similar articles now in the royal apartments of the Pitti Palace. M. The gold dessert service, gold and silver ornaments, rare china, valuable plate, croziers and crucifixes in ivory and amber, the mitre with miniatures made of hummingbirds' feathers which had belonged to Clement VII, priceless works in niello, handsome goblets and vases by Benvenuto Cellini, and many other heirlooms of the family, all now in the treasure room of the Pitti Palace. N. The reliquaries and other ornaments of the Grand Ducal Chapel in the Pitti Palace. O. The immense Medicean wardrobe of costly robes and dresses for state occasions. From Poggio Imperiale, from Castello, from Petraia, from Cafaggiolo, from Poggio a Caiano, from the Villa Medici at Rome, from every habitation that the Medici had occupied, poured in for many years afterwards this great collection of objects of art, to be gathered in the galleries and museums of Florence in accordance with the terms of this gift, terms to which Florence owes it that these treasures have not been long since either dispersed or removed to Vienna or Rome. The Medici themselves have passed away, but their works live on, and of all that they have left behind them as a record of the spirit which animated them, nothing can surpass that which a whole world enjoys through the gift which was their last act, and which the traditions of their house, and the principles implanted long before by its founder, caused them to present to their nation, even when smarting under a sense of injustice and disappointment. Speaking of this action, an Italian writer of the present day has said: "By this act the Princess Anna Maria, in securing to the country so much that was most notable of its art, acquired a truly imperishable title to the gratitude of Italy, and one which deserved to outweigh and make forgiven many faults of her ancestors." It is when one looks at the Florence of to day, without manufactures or the business of a seaport, and yet so prosperous a city, that one realizes what this gift, with all the others previously given by the Medici, has meant to her. That prosperity entirely depends on Florence's power to attract visitors from other countries. Without that power, she, the second city of Italy, would sink back at once to the level of her ancient rival, Lucca. And were all that the Medici gave to Florence taken away, the whole of that influx of visitors from other countries would cease. For her three great churches would not by themselves attract it, and even San Marco would be gone. So that Anna Maria Ludovica, little as she could have realized all that its consequences would be, by this parting gift in the name of her family, did the very best thing she could have done to ensure the future prosperity of Florence. Yet in the city which her action has thus enriched, her very name is almost unknown. No statue of her adorns any of its open spaces. No gallery or museum, of all those which she has to a great extent filled, and protected from having their contents removed to other cities, has her name written over its doors, or any bust or picture of her placed in honor on its walls. And thousands interested in art pass through Florence every season, or even leave that city after long residence there, without ever having heard her name. Of the items included in this gift, the last, the Medicean wardrobe, was not permanently retained. Some 30 years afterwards, in the time of the Grand Duke Pietro Leopoldo, the first of the Austrian Grand Dukes, who was a resident ruler of Tuscany, it was broken up and sold. And some idea of the magnificence customary in what we now know as the Pitti Palace, in the time of the Medici Grand Dukes, is given us by the details of this sale, which on account of the mass of valuable things to be disposed of, continued monthly for 10 years. Napier says: "Nor was the ancient Medicean wardrobe, which had long reposed in idle splendour, more spared by the stern frugality of Leopold. Almost every residence of the Medici throughout Tuscany had its peculiar wardrobe, independent of the great magazine of Medicean splendour in Florence, and all were now exposed to public sale. Velvets, damasks, gold embroideries, chairs and mirror frames of massive silver, gold brocades, rich lace, fringes, and costly silken fabrics were either sold to the public or condemned to the crucible. Gian Gastone's state bed, embroidered throughout with a profusion of beautiful pearls and other gems, was picked to pieces, and many exquisite works in jewellery and precious metals, the symbols of Medicean taste and magnificence, were all broken up or otherwise disposed of to the amount of 500,000 of crowns." Anna Maria Ludovica had not to endure for many years the daily mortifications resulting from the establishment of a foreign rule over her country. In 1742, 5 years after that rule had been set up, her health began to give way. She suffered much from dropsy, and felt that she had not much longer to live. Having still a large amount of personal property to dispose of, including her own wearing jewels, the contents of her wardrobes, the furniture of her rooms, china, plate, and nearly £2,000,000 sterling in money, she set about adding various codicils to the will which she had made some 3 years before. And desiring to leave some portion of her property to her next of kin, whoever he might be, she had drawn up for her a genealogical tree, showing not only the historic Medici, the descendants of Giovanni de Medici, of whom she was the last, but also the collateral branches of the family. By its means, retracing her family for some 450 years, back to Salvestro, the grandfather of Giovanni de Medici, she discovered that a descendant of Salvestro's brother Giovenco, a certain Pietro Paolo de Medici, was her nearest of kin, though not, of course, a descendant of the historic Medici, whereupon she added a clause to her will declaring him her heir, and leaving him a portion of her property. She only lived a few months after completing these final testamentary dispositions, and on the 18th February 1743, at the age of 76, Anna Maria Ludovica, the last remaining descendant of Giovanni de' Medici, passed away, and the family which he had founded, and which had had such a long and eventful history, was extinct. The chief provisions of Anna Maria Ludovica's will and its codicils are briefly detailed by the English ambassador, Horace Mann, as follows: 1. All her courtiers and servants to have their salaries for life. 2. Pensions to her 4 executors. 3. To pay the above pensions and salaries, a large sum of money deposited in the Bank of Santa Maria Nuova. 4. To the Marquis Rinoncini, the principal executor, her lands in the state of Urbino, and a considerable legacy of much of the rich furniture in her audience room. 5. Her china, half to young Rinoncini and half to Coroni. 6. To the Marquis Guadagni, to Siristori, and to Bardi, her 3 other executors, besides their pensions, very rich presents in silver. 7. To Madame Uguccioni, her mistress of the robes, the whole of the contents of a room containing, besides many other things, velvet brocades, linen, etc., valued at 10,000 crowns, and a toilet service of gold. 8. To all her maids of honor presents and the usual fortunes in case of marriage. 9. To the Austrian Grand Duke she left the whole of her own wearing jewels, annexing them to those of the state of Tuscany, with which they are to descend. Their value in present money is supposed to be about £500,000. Besides this, the Grand Duke is left heir to 1,000 other things. 10. To her più prossimo agnato, nearest of kin, Pietro Paolo de' Medici, 30,000 crowns. And as other pensioners die off, their pensions go to him and his heirs, till the sum is made up to 100,000 crowns. Also jewels and plate, valued at about 150,000 crowns. 11. Presents in jewels to the Queen of Hungary, Maria Theresa, to Prince Charles, and to several princes of Germany. 12. Also a very large legacy to the Prince of Salzbach, Elector Palatine. A codicil dated 7th October 1739 provided that on the death of legatees who were given pensions under the will, the portions of the estate set free by their death are to be invested by the executors in sound securities, and the interest of such investments to be devoted to carrying on, finishing, and perfecting the royal mausoleum situated behind the choir of the venerable Church of San Lorenzo, with the same excellence and preciousness employed up to the present, and on the plan of the models and designs which have been made. On the night of the 22nd February, a stately funeral, accompanied by every accessory which could heighten its melancholy grandeur, and surrounded by so great a mass of torches that they lighted up the entire street as the procession moved along, left the royal palace, and passed slowly down the Via Maggio, over the Ponte Santa Trinita, and along the Via Tornabuoni to the mausoleum behind San Lorenzo. The body was conveyed in a sort of coach, quite open, and with a canopy over the head. It was the funeral given by the orders of the Austrian Grand Duke to her who had hoped to die Grand Duchess of Tuscany in her own right. Thus with solemn pomp, and amidst the tears of the many poor whom she had assisted, was laid with her ancestors in that mausoleum where none any more were to be buried, one who had maintained, not unworthily, the honour of her family, and whose tomb bears the inscription, "The last of the royal race of the Medici."
We hope you enjoyed this video. Please let us know in the comments what other art contents you would like to see. And don't forget to like this video and follow our channel. Thank you, and until the next video.